Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Can you believe it? There's a so-called Civil Rights Commission in Colorado that apparently hates Christians. And, you know, after the Supreme Court ruled clearly in favor of the Christian baker, saying he had a free speech right to refuse to bake cakes, they've now after him again, even though the Supreme Court ruled in the favor of Jack Phillips. That same Civil Rights Commission that criticized his faith and almost put him out of business is once again trying to punish this Christian baker.
Well, this time, Phillips refused to make a cake celebrating a transgender transition. As Heather Sells reports, some say the gay rights community wants to take down this Christian baker.
6 years ago, authorities went after Jack Phillips for refusing to bake a cake for a gay wedding. Now he's in trouble again, this time for refusing to bake a cake to celebrate a gender transition.
The Bible teaches that God made male and female, and I believe that we don't get to choose that, and we don't get to change that.
That's a politically incorrect belief these days. Regent University law professor Brad Jacob says it makes sense that Phillips is once again in hot water.
Phillips has become a target now. The lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community in Colorado has focused on him. He's become kind of the poster boy of Christians who don't accept all the practices of the gay community. And so it's not particularly surprising that they're going after him again.
The Supreme Court's ruling helps put the target on Phillips' back by failing to address his claim that he has the right to obey his conscience. Instead, the justices blamed the Colorado Civil Rights Commission for showing hostility to his beliefs. And now that the commission is after him again, Phillips says that hostility is back too. But this time, he's going on the offensive.
The state is essentially empowering people who want to harass him to file these complaints and to essentially bring him down by continuing to harass him through these discrimination charges. And so we need the federal court to step in and say the state can't allow that.
Jacob says it's not clear that the commission is indeed targeting Phillips, although he believes it could have ignored the latest complaint.
The commission certainly could say, we've already gone after this guy once, let's drop it, let's leave him alone.
What's needed ultimately is for the high court to decide just how people of faith can draw a line when it comes to issues such as same-sex marriage and gender transition that go against their beliefs. Until then, Christians and others face a host of questions with uncertain consequences. Heather Sells, CBN News.
You know, he didn't like there's only one baker in Colorado. I mean, surely in Denver or somewhere where he lives, there must be two bakers, maybe three or four. Why go after him, you know?
Well, it's obvious that they're making a point.
Well, obviously, they're trying to set him up, and they come to him and they say, well, we want you to do this. And then he says, well, look, that violates my conscience. If you want to buy something off the shelf, I've got plenty of cakes for you. But
so, Pat, how do anybody who wants to stand for freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, needs to support this man? How do you do that?
Well, I guess the thing he can do is maybe, I don't know if he's got a defense fund. He probably needs something, but nevertheless, I think the lawyers are working for free on this one, and they say it's pro bono. And but in any event, it looks like that Civil Rights Commission ought to realize, the Supreme Court has spoken.
Yeah, really?
You know, how much higher do you want to get it? I mean, we have freedom of speech, and what they're saying is that you cannot force somebody to perform an act against his conscience. That's what they're saying. And these other people are saying, I don't care what your conscience says. We are gay, lesbian, bisexual, and all this other stuff, and we want people to agree with us whether they like it or not. That's what it is. They want to enforce their point of view on the public. And Phillips is standing against that, and God bless him. Well, in other news, just 2 weeks before his confirmation hearings are set to begin, Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh has crucial meetings on the Hill today. John Jessup has more on that.
Thanks, Pat. The nominee meets with Maine Senator Susan Collins today. Collins, a moderate Republican, is seen as a key vote because of her support for Roe v. Wade. However, she's spoken well of Cavanaugh, describing him as qualified for the job. Cavanaugh also meets with one of his fiercest opponents, New York Democrat Chuck Schumer. Schumer is still leading the charge to delay the confirmation, demanding review of nearly 1 million documents from Kavanaugh's time in the George W. Bush administration. You can learn more about the battle for Kavanaugh's confirmation on our Supreme Court Showdown page at cbnnews.com. Well, Russian hackers are targeting conservative political groups and the United States Senate in the run-up to the midterm elections. Microsoft announced today groups tied to the Russian government created fake internet sites for the Hudson Institute and the International Republican Institute. Other pages mimicked the U.S. Senate. There's no evidence anyone visited the fake sites, but clicking on the pages could have exposed users to surveillance and possible data theft. National Security Advisor John Bolton said it's crucial to go on the offensive to counter cyber threats to protect not only our democracy, but critical infrastructures like power utilities.
I think you need to establish structures of deterrence so that our adversaries who have conducted cyber operations against us or who are contemplating it come to understand they will pay a much higher price if they do that than if they simply refrain.
And last week, President Trump announced plans to scrap an Obama-era directive that critics saw as, critics saw as limiting of America's ability to conduct cyber warfare. Pat, back to you.
Well, you know, I've said it before, I say it again. The NSA has the preeminent qualification in terms of cyber. There is no organization in the world that can match our NSA, and they have huge facilities. And the thing that Bolton is saying, and I totally agree with, all right, if these guys want to come after us, then let's go after them, and let's make it pay. You know, if they're going to permit. Now, was this a government activity in Russia or these individual hackers? We don't know for sure. But nevertheless, the Russian government is aiding and abetting in this kind of activity, as are the Koreans, as are the Chinese and others. So let's just turn our cyber activities against them and to say, if you come after us, we're going to punish you in ways that you will not like. And I think that's what's happened. Apparently, under the Obama administration, our cyber forces were being restrained. But now Bolton is saying, and I totally agree with him, let's turn the dogs loose. And let's see what happens. All right, John?
Pat, President Trump fears any statement he makes to special counsel Robert Mueller could put him in a perjury trap. In an interview with Reuters, the president said if his testimony contradicts former FBI Director James Comey's, the special counsel might choose to believe Comey over him. The president continued saying, it's my word against his, and he's best friends with Mueller. So Mueller might say, well, I believe Comey, and even if I'm telling the truth, that makes me a liar. That's no good. Mr. Trump said also, Pat, that he hasn't decided if he'll answer the special counsel's questions.
You know, Jay Sekulow worked for the American Center for Law and Justice. He's the general counsel. He's one of Trump's counsel. I've spoken with him. I've spoken with Rudy Giuliani. No lawyer in his right mind would put his client into a situation where he could be charged with perjury. And what Giuliani said is absolutely true. Correct. There is no such thing as truth when you're dealing with a matter like this. Trump says, I didn't talk about that. The other man says he did. So what's truth? Well, all it's got to do is to have the general counsel, the special prosecutor, bring charges. So, well, that's actually Trump now was guilty of perjury. So now you've got a whole perjury trial for the president on the strength of an innocent statement. And there is no truth. And you've got a hostile general counsel. He's got a team of Democrat partisans working with him. Virtually every person he's hired has been a Hillary Clinton supporter. And what are they going to do? Are you going to put the president in that kind of thing? No way. Written interrogatories, by all means. If he wants to get written answers, give him written answers. But don't put him into that kind of a trap. And no lawyer in his right mind would do that. So the president should not be faced with that. And if it's the Supreme Court showdown, well, by all means, have one. But don't let the president get set up for perjury. John?
Thanks, Pat. Where should prison reform begin? While lawmakers on Capitol Hill work toward changing the system, others say tackling incarceration should start in the courtroom. Amber Strong has a story.
To friends and family, Matthew Charles appeared to be a model citizen.
Matthew is a kind, considerate person, very good heart.
He spent 21 years in prison on a drug charge. He was released for 2 years and on an apparent path to redemption until a technical error put him back behind bars. His case and others like it are grabbing headlines and the attention of everyone from celebrities to the president. Earlier this year, a bipartisan effort to pass prison reform sailed through the House. Now criminal justice reform advocates are in a race against time to get support from the Senate. Dubbed the First Step Act, it aims to fund prison redemption programs and allow certain prisoners the chance to serve out their time in halfway houses. But when it comes to the Senate, there's another hurdle. Groups on both sides of the aisle want to see an effort to reform sentencing.
And you have judges around this country who are saying, I don't think you deserve that. I don't want to send you away for life. You don't need to die in prison for society to be safe. But I have no choice because Congress passed this law. So we have to get rid of these policies and let judges have discretion when they sentence people.
Research shows the U.S. locks up a larger share of its population than any other country, due in part to mandatory minimum sentences. Fresh off a meeting with President Trump, Senator Tim Scott says he's hopeful the Senate can find a way to meet in the middle.
The question is there a way for us to add on top of the prison reform legislation criminal justice reform that would give release valves on nonviolent, perhaps first-time offenders, as opposed to having to deal with the mandatory minimums, having a way to reduce the sentence. That is a far more treacherous ground for us to wade through.
In the past, the administration has not been open to sentencing reform, but advocates tell CBN News they see flickers of hope from the president. In the meantime, faith-based organizations like Prison Fellowship will stand in the gap, reaching out to prisoners before they are released.
As Christians, we suit up, we show up, and we do what Christ would have us do, and we go into their prisons, and as we heal the prisons in America, I think we heal the communities in America.
Charles's girlfriend Naomi believes faith makes the difference in his journey then and now.
Not once have I seen animosity or anger throughout this whole situation. He has a very strong spirit. God is with him, no doubt.
Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Amber. Pat, back to you.
You know, we've been following this whole thing. We've had a series we call A Nation of Criminals, and it is a shocking truth that the United States of America incarcerates more people, percentage-wise, than Soviet Russia or communist China. If you can believe that. And now I've asked our news department to do a feature on it, and I think we're going to have one the next week or so. In the agencies, not Congress, but the agencies have put something like 300,000 criminal sanctions in their rulings, 300,000 of them. And I want to find out how many people are incarcerated because they violated some sanction that was established by a federal agency. That's something the president, by a stroke of the pen, can do away with. But Congress, again, has to reform. We had all this prison reform thing and get tough on crime and all this. But what's happened is we have mandatory minimum sentences now. Judges' hands are tied, and we are putting people in jail. They have a couple of joints of marijuana. The next thing you know, they've got 5 years in prison. I mean, it's just outrageous. The cost is extraordinary, but not only financially, the cost in human capital. What we're doing to people by putting them into prison is terrible. I mean, there's one thing to have rehabilitation and to try to rehab people, and there are programs that are very beneficial in that regard. But no, this is just, you know, I don't know who it is, the Democrats, Republicans, or all of them. But they had to run on, I'm tough on crime, I'll get elected, I'm going to be tough. Well, we hurt ourselves very badly, and the president has a way of changing it, but we want to get before him those agencies that put people in prison for violating one of their rules. That's where we start. John.
President Trump says he won't make any concessions with Turkey to get detained American pastor Andrew Brunson out of the country. Trump told Reuters he thought he had a deal with Turkey's president when he helped persuade Israel to release the Turkish citizen it had detained. Mr. Trump said he expected President Erdogan to free Brunson, calling the pastor, quote, "a very innocent and wonderful man and a great Christian father." But Turkey denies it ever agreed to release Brunson in return. Well, the Israeli security agency known as Shin Bet says it has stopped at least 250 terror attacks this year. It's one reason why Israel is qualified to help other nations prevent such attacks. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell has that story.
This terror simulation is part of the training at Israel's National Police Academy.
The warriors in a firefight with the terrorists, it's a sad event, but we train them day and night because this mass attack is not our imagination. It's happened in Israel, it's happened in the world, and this is our job as a counterterrorism unit to save and protect.
For Israel, terrorism has been a reality for more than 70 years. A terrorist in a truck carried out an attack similar to the simulation 2 years ago. He plowed into a group of soldiers, killing 4. That deadly terror attack took place right here, a popular place called the Tayelet, overlooking Jerusalem. And that's why these security barriers were installed to prevent future attacks. The reenactments were the grand finale of the first International Homeland Security Forum in Jerusalem.
We're sharing intelligence strategies, how we deal with preventing those attacks, how we can improve transferring intelligence, because when you have strong intelligence, you can prevent a terrorist attack from taking place.
It drew Homeland Security ministers from some 20 countries.
The goal we've set before us, enhancing our cooperation in fighting terror, incitement, radicalization, and cyber threats, is extremely complex.
According to Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan, 2 defining characteristics make up the current terror wave in Israel: online incitement and radicalization combined with easily accessible weapons. Erdan says he doesn't believe that democracies are doomed to suffer from terrorism forever. By working together, countries can meet the challenges to protect their citizens and make their countries safe. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Impressive and incredibly important work.